These are the top 10 submarine movies, ranked using the verdicts of real Navy officers and veterans, not critics. Some are so accurate the military actually used them for training. July 1961. The Soviet Union's first ballistic missile submarine is out on patrol when the reactor's cooling system springs a leak. Harrison Ford plays the captain, and he's dealing with a brand new sub that's already falling apart and a crew that doesn't trust him. When that leak happens, everything goes to hell immediately. There's no backup cooling system. They can't reach Moscow, and if they don't fix it, the reactor's going to explode, potentially triggering a nuclear detonation off the coast of Greenland. This actually happened in real life. 7 men died within days from radiation exposure. More followed later. The film shows it exactly how it went down. The desperation, the sacrifice, the fact that these guys knew they were dead the moment they volunteered. Lieutenant Eric Washkowitz, who served on the USS Hartford, said the opening shipyard scene captured something he'd lived through. That constant tension between making sure the sub is actually ready versus the pressure to just get it back out to sea as fast as possible. He said that's exactly what his job felt like as a junior officer. This one is a French thriller from 2019 that most people haven't seen, which is a shame because it's probably the most technically accurate submarine movie made in the last 20 years. The story follows a young sonar expert on a French nuclear sub. His ability to analyze underwater sound makes him the only person who can prevent a nuclear war when France and Russia end up in a standoff. The whole movie hinges on split-second decisions based on acoustic data, the kind of details most submarine films ignore completely. The director, Antonin Baudry, used to work as a diplomat, and he loaded the script with military and political authenticity that you rarely see. He filmed on actual French Navy submarines to get the details right, and French naval officials were so impressed they encouraged their own crews to watch it. Captain Bill Tody, who's a retired U.S. Navy captain and former Hollywood technical advisor, said it's the most realistic submarine film since The Boat. He specifically said nothing recent gets as close to the actual acoustic warfare. Lieutenant Commander Marcello Martinez agreed, said the film got the operational side almost exactly right, even down to how the sound analysis works. Robert Mitchum here plays an American destroyer captain hunting a German U-boat in the South Atlantic during World War II. Kurt Jürgens is the German skipper. The whole movie is just these two guys playing deadly chess with each other across the ocean. What makes this one different is they actually cared about getting it right. The production brought in Albert Beck, a former German U-boat sailor. He was a consultant here. For the destroyer scenes, they used the USS Whitehurst, which had actually seen combat in World War II. The ending gets a little sentimental, but the cat and mouse game feels real. And the respect between the two captains, even though they're trying to kill each other, that part actually works. Theodore Kuhlmeier, former U.S. Marine Corps captain, watched it and said it's the best World War II submarine movie hands down. He specifically called out the depth charge scenes. Watching the U-boat get pounded from above made him glad he never had to experience that himself. Ed Harris is a Soviet submarine captain during the Cold War, and he gets handed a secret mission. The movie's actually inspired by something real. Back in 1968, a Soviet sub called the K-129 sank, and nobody's ever gotten the full story of what actually happened. Phantom takes that real disaster and invents its own version where there's a rogue nuclear launch and this whole doomsday plot. That part's Hollywood. But what the movie actually nails is what it felt like to be trapped inside one of those 1960s Soviet submarines when the world was on the edge of nuclear war. You're watching these guys operate in this cramped metal tube, knowing that one mistake could start World War III, and the movie makes you feel that pressure. They clearly talked to people who knew what those subs were actually like because the details are all there. Now, yeah, they threw in a stealth device that never existed and a mutiny for drama. It's still a Hollywood movie, but it's built on the bones of a real Cold War mystery. Cary Grant's playing a submarine captain in World War II, and his orders are so secret that he doesn't even know what the mission is until after they've left port. Turns out they're picking up a meteorologist and sneaking up to the Japanese coast to gather weather data for the Doolittle raid, the first American airstrike on Tokyo. Along the way, they've got to avoid getting detected and sunk by Japanese patrols. The movie came out in 1943, right in the middle of the war, and the Navy started using it as an actual training film. They built the submarine in the movie as an exact replica of a real U.S. Navy sub. They deliberately scrambled some of the equipment placements for security reasons so they weren't giving away classified details. But the crew from the actual submarine Wahoo came in as technical advisors. Captain Matthew Carr from the Naval Academy said it combined real events from multiple submarines and packed a lot of action into one film. That's a pretty solid endorsement from someone who actually teaches this stuff, especially for a movie that's over 80 years old and still holds up. In Submarine X-1, they put James Caan in a tiny submarine in 1968 and told him to blow up a battleship. The subs in this movie are these British X-class midgets. And when I say midget, I mean these things were basically metal coffins with engines. The mission was to sneak into a Norwegian fjord and destroy a German battleship that was hiding there. The best thing about Submarine X-1 is it's based on something that actually happened. There was this operation in 1943 called Operation Source, where the British tried to take out the Tirpitz using these exact same tiny subs. The movie changes some details. They renamed the battleship Caan's character is made up, but the operation itself is real. And the real version was a disaster. Multiple subs were lost. Some crews escaped, some got captured, one sub just vanished and nobody ever found out what happened to it. One actually managed to plant explosives under the real Tirpitz before the crew was taken prisoner. So this isn't some Hollywood invention about brave guys in subs. This happened and a lot of people died trying to pull it off. Here's why real naval officers like Greyhound, it doesn't try to be exciting. Tom Hanks is commanding a destroyer in 1942, escorting a convoy across the Atlantic. There's a stretch in the middle where there's no air cover and German U-boat wolf packs would just sit there waiting to pick off merchant ships. That's the whole movie. Hank's trying to keep his convoy alive while submarines circle them. The story itself is fictional, adapted from a novel, but what makes it work is that every detail came from actual convoy operations. The tactics, the procedures, the decisions Hanks has to make, that's all pulled from what really happened out there. And this wasn't some side mission. Historian James Holland pointed out that if the Allies had lost control of the Atlantic, Britain falls. No D-Day happens, the Soviets don't get supplied, the whole war effort collapses. These convoys were keeping the entire Allied strategy alive. In 1939, a submarine called the USS Squalus goes down during a test dive off New England. Mechanical failure, straight to the bottom, crew trapped inside, and at this point in history, nobody had ever gotten people out of a sunken sub alive. This TV movie tells the story of how they figured it out. Sam Neill plays the guy who led the rescue using this diving bell he'd helped invent. It had never been tested in a real emergency. They had no idea if it would work. The film's based on a book by Peter Moss who documented the whole thing, and apparently they kept it accurate. The technology, the timeline, how risky the whole operation was. 33 men got out alive, which made it the first successful submarine rescue in history. So there's this movie from 1965 that most people have completely forgotten about, but it captured something about the Cold War that's kind of terrifying when you think about it. The Bedford Incident follows a U.S. Navy destroyer called the USS Bedford that's tracking a Soviet submarine off the coast of Greenland. And this wasn't some made-up scenario. This actually happened all the time during the Cold War, especially during the Cuban Missile Crisis years. American and Soviet vessels playing this constant game of cat and mouse in the Arctic, both sides armed with nuclear weapons. The captain, played by Richard Widmark, is obsessed with not letting this Soviet sub escape. He pushes his crew harder and harder, and you can feel the pressure building throughout the film. What the movie gets right is showing how command works in that environment, how mistakes stack up, how one captain's personality can create this powder keg situation. The climax is based on something the military was genuinely terrified of during that era. A simple misunderstanding between crew members leads to disaster. The Bedford Incident got overshadowed by Dr. Strangelove and Fail Safe, which came out around the same time, but it's maybe the scariest of the three because it shows how easily it could happen. Wolfgang Petersen made this movie in 1981 and decided he wasn't going to fake anything. They built a full-scale U-boat interior that could tilt and roll hydraulically. They took the actors and trained them like actual submariners. And then they brought in the actual captain of U-96 from World War II to make sure they got it right. The boat is about what happens to people trapped in a metal tube for months. Hunting convoys, getting depth charged, sometimes sitting on the ocean floor waiting to see if the hull's going to implode. Admiral Robert Burke from the U.S. Navy, he's the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, watched it decades later and said something interesting. He said you relate to these guys even though they're the enemy, because they're doing what sailors in any navy do, just trying to survive against an unforgiving sea. No other submarine film has come close to that level of authenticity, and probably none ever will.